I'm Amy Baxter, editor of Retail Leader, and welcome to Trend Talk. Every week on Trend Talk, we're going to identify a trend in the retail industry and give it a deep dive with the industry insider. We're focusing really on the grocery, convenience, and drug sector. Today's guest is Dan Ochwat, executive editor of Store Brands, and we are talking about the explosive growth of private labels today. Dan is an expert on brands, so I'm super excited to have him here today. So welcome, Dan. Could you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yeah, I actually spent, 2 decades in retail publications and mostly writing for consumer goods brands. So in the last year and a half now, I've been focusing on private labels. So it's really kind of cool to see the similarities and then just also the growth of private label and even how it's comparing with consumer goods. So it's a fun industry right now.
Yeah, I want to ask you, just start off about an overview of the trend. Several big box retailers have had their own private labels for years, but recently there's been almost an urgency to introduce more private labels. Target continues to expand their private label offerings. And just last week, Amazon introduced Aplenty, which has a lot of product variety. So what's the scope of this trend?
Yeah, I think, the scale is really just in the success of it. We just reported PLMA, the Private Label Manufacturers Association, just reported that they've got a 12% increase in sales this year from private label, and it was like almost $159 billion. Mm-hmm. And IRI said, I think it was like projected $20 billion growth in store brands. So these are big numbers, and this was even before the pandemic. IRI and FMI were reporting big numbers. Some of it coming from millennials who, I think the FMI report said like more than half of millennials choose a retailer based on their store brands. So it's like there's this younger consumer who's really pushing private labels, I think, in terms of acceptance of it. And retailers are seeing that. But then also, they make retailers so much money. So, it only makes sense to keep rolling them out. You've got Target, like you mentioned, Good and Gather made $1 billion in its first year. All in Motion made $1 billion in its first year, and they've got 4 brands over $2 billion. Mm-hmm. So clearly, if they're seeing this level of success, it's no surprise that Favorite Day comes out, and then it's no surprise that Amazon is going to anchor their center store by Aplenty. So I just think there's just so much success right now, and they're making money. So keep it going.
Yeah. Is there like a gap in the shelves that these private labels are honing in on? Like, why are millennials in particular also flocking to these types of brands?
Yeah, I think that's more of like it's just a demographic shift. But like in terms of gap in shelves, I don't think there's ever like gaps in shelves just because there's so many brands. But I think what it is you're going to probably see, if anything, a limited shelf where you're going to see them streamlining shelves down to having, more private brands on there, less major brands, some more challenger brands filling in spots. So I just think it's more of a, efficiency where they're making so much money, they're going to dedicate a certain amount of space to private brands. And if you see like the big trend of Aldi and Trader Joe's, 90% of those stores are store brands, the assortment. So I think younger shoppers really love those stores too. And retailers are seeing that you don't have to have a ton of product on shelf. You can earn their loyalty with some really good store brands, fill in choice with the others. Sort of that model.
Yeah. And so it has been going on for, pre-pandemic, but I think the pandemic also created a big opportunity with big manufacturers had some supply chain issues keeping up with demand in certain product categories. And I know one of the benefits of private labels is just being also to respond quickly to consumer tastes. And we saw certain categories of foods, really take off during COVID, like people were just snacking more. So,
me too.
Can you talk a little bit about how private labels how that's an advantage for them and how maybe they've exploited a little bit during last year to ramp up?
I think you're right. Part of it was out of stock, so they're picking up private label because that's there, and all of a sudden they're finding out it's actually as good or if not better. But the biggest thing, the trick that retailers have is data. They have loyalty data numbers, they've got register ring numbers, they've got e-commerce data, they've got all the data and it's the biggest strength that, a big consumer brand doesn't have. So they know exactly what their shopper wants,
Yeah.
and they can tailor a private brand to meet them, and they can get a product out so much quicker than a consumer goods brand. So they're able to react to trends a lot quicker than a big national. So I think that plays to their strengths.
Mm-hmm. Is there any tension between big brands and these private labels coming out?
I always wondered, I asked that question too. That was like one of the first questions I asked the retailer when I was talking to them. And they were quick to say no, because they obviously need them to.
Yeah.
Consumers want choice, and private label is only about 20% of the market share. I think Albertsons last year was like 25% market share with their private brands, and they're gunning for 30%. They were our retailer of the year last year when we did an interview with them about that. And that, if you look at that number compared to like European levels, like their private label is a much larger percentage of the market. So they're not completely overtaking things,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean they are driving so much profit for the retailers. They're just not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, and there have been some reports of like stealing some of that market share. So I'm wondering when's
what's the cutoff?
Yeah,
I know, me too. Yeah. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see.
More.
Yeah, like if there will be tension, I don't know. That's certainly, you certainly would wonder. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to see.
Yeah. So what are your predictions going forward? How big do you think private label will get, or what do you see for the future?
I mean, I think you have to think it's only going to get bigger. Like if I said, like I mentioned, Target with those 4 brands that are $2 billion or more, and then how quickly those 2 brands came out and made so much money. There's just so much acceptance. I just feel like there's no reason why they're not going to keep going. And Kroger, I think, was $26 billion they made last year in store brands. So there's just so much growth there. But then the other thing is, like, besides the numbers, it's just they've gotten so much slicker. You look at like Walmart, like I'm obsessed with Walmart's free assembly apparel line that they came out with. It's so much different than anything you would expect Walmart would put out. Is like what we think of Walmart, like the Great Value brand, or it's a great brand, but free assembly is like a very hip looking brand. It just, to me, it's like they're clearly targeting younger consumers, and I feel like that's the way to go. And so the future is going to be very bright, because these if millennials are really growing up with these brands and loving these brands, then it's only going to continue to grow. I mean, I think of like my son. I always think about this. My son, the way he grows up without like Saturday morning cartoons like I did with like big national commercials. I knew brands before I knew retailers. His first word was probably Target. He knew like retailers more than he knew any sort of brands, because he wasn't getting hit with big TV commercials. He's been streaming ever since he doesn't know any of it. So it's interesting to me that I think they grow up with an attachment to a retailer quickly. They're always walking into stores with us, on our legs and stuff like that. So then they're going in and they bond with these products that they're putting out, and they're as nice as like Good and Gather and Favorite Day and Bowl and Basket. Like these are big time looking brands.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. Like the retailers just have created an identity, really, that's
yes,
really relatable. And
they've gotten so much better at, like, I know a lot of times when I talk to these experts, they're always talking about the old Campbell, the old first private label soup can. It was just a white label with black word soup on it or something. It's like, like we don't have to go that extreme, but if you look at like Great Value, and then you look at like Good and Gather and Bowl and Basket and the Plenty, like these things are, and even Albertsons, when I was talking to them, they run their ship like a CPG. So it's like they're just getting so sophisticated. Like, why wouldn't this thing just keep getting bigger?
Yeah. Well, so lastly, I want to ask you, what are some of the downfalls maybe of trying out new private labels for retailers?
I think for them, like, I guess the biggest downfall would be, you lose that loyalty. Like if that's everything. The danger with private label is it's tied to that retail store. So if they put out a private label that fails,
there's some risk.
Then that retailer itself loses out on loyalty, and that's massive risk compared to a national brand that can probably just, like clear Pepsi, you just forget about it or whatever, like those classic supposed brand fails or whatever. But like but a retail private line, they label, they cannot risk that. They will that'll kill them. So I think there is big risk, but they just do it so well that they're not going to risk that much.
Yeah, cool. Will be interesting to see where it goes and how bigger it becomes.
Yeah, how big it can get. Like, that's really the question it feels like right now.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dan, so much for sharing your insights. That's going to do it for us on Trend Talk today, and we'll see you back here next week with another retail trend.
Thanks so much. Bye.